Hey, welcome everybody. This is the last installment of our Western Lake Erie Basin webinar series. I want to thank everybody who's been coming to them for the last 3 months. I think they've been pretty successful. And our last session will be a little different from the other ones, which have been mostly natural science based. So this one's going to be social science based. And so we'll learn about something different than we have in the past sessions. So if you don't know me, my name is Allison Bressler, and I'm the program manager of the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group. This is a community group in Michigan that works collaboratively with Michigan's quality of life agencies to inform how the state implements projects aimed at managing and monitoring phosphorus to improve water quality in Lake Erie. And the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group and this webinar series are generously funded by the WLEB Family Foundation, so we want to thank them for their continued support. So during today's webinar, we welcome Adam Reimer, who is the Outreach and Evaluation Scientist with the National Wildlife Federation, where he works to support agriculture conservation through applied social science. NWF works closely with farmers and conservation professionals to expand use of regenerative agriculture across the country. And we also welcome Marie Carmen Shingne, an independent consultant having recently completed a postdoctoral research position at NWF, and before that, a PhD from Michigan State University in environmental sociology. In both of these most recent roles, she worked with farmers and conservation professionals in Michigan on adoption of regenerative agriculture and assessments of the MEEP program. So I want to welcome both of you today. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time today. And for everyone who is on the call, there will be a question and answer session at the end. So as you think of your questions, feel free to post them in the chat. And then I will coordinate that at the end to make sure all of your questions are asked. You also will have the opportunity to unmute and ask questions at the end. So if you want to ask your question out loud, you can do that as well. All right, so now I'm going to pass this off to Marie Carmen to share her screen and get us started.
Right, thanks, Allison. Let me put this up. Hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm going to be presenting on a project that I was a part of in 2020 and 2021 while I was finishing my PhD work. This project was working with certain farmers and certified crop advisors in Michigan, looking at general conservation practice adoption, but specifically also looking at engagement with the MEEP, so Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program. There we go. I actually got it right for once. So a little bit of background on the project itself. This was funded by the WLEB Family Foundation. It was organized by Michigan Association of Conservation Districts, and it was based on a literature review conducted by WaterWords That Work, where they specifically found that there were these 3 groups within the farming community that were not being engaged as much in research, even though they were really key to a lot of decision making, specifically young farmers, women farmers, and CCAs. So this project was looking at it was looking at whether they adopt and encourage the adoption of conservation practices and verify with and encourage verification through MEEP. The project location was focused on 3 counties in southeastern Michigan, so Washtenaw County, Lenawee County, and Monroe County. There we go. So we had 24 participants, 9 women, 8 young farmers, and 7 CCAs. We did phone and Zoom interviews between November 2020 and June 2021. And the questions we asked were contextual, so about the farm or the CCA's business, the farmer conservation practices, whether they were engaging with them and which ones, and also MEEP thoughts and engagement with the program. The demographics of our participants were all from multi-generational farm families. There were 2 women farmers who themselves didn't originally come from farm families, but they did marry into them. Farm size varied pretty widely. So we had some farms that were just over 100 acres to several that were over 2,000 acres. All of the farms from farmers that we interviewed had some kind of row or cash crop piece. And then about half of them also had a cow or calf piece as well. So either dairy or beef. Interestingly, only female farmers mentioned other endeavors on their farms, so things like greenhouses, lavender fields, agritourism, and small animals. None of the young farmers included this. They were focused fully on row crops and cow-calf operations. Land ownership was pretty mixed. We saw some who owned all of their land, some who rented all of their land, some had some acres that they owned and some that they rented. So there was no one theme related to that. And we also didn't really see themes in their adoption of conservation practices, depending on if they owned or rented their land. For CCAs, we had 6 agronomists for major agricultural retailers, and we had 1 self-employed agronomist with their own business. So what I'm going to really focus on for the findings are these key takeaways that we found, these key themes. So first of all was a theme around motivations, why farmers were engaging with conservation practices. Also, time was a key barrier that farmers mentioned, both for general farming, but also specifically for adopting conservation practices. The Farm Bureau came up quite a bit as a hub for peer networking and for information, so as an information source. And then some of the findings related to MEEP, there were overall positive views, but it did tend to self-select for more environmentally minded farmers. And then interestingly, there really wasn't much of a change from a previous research project that this project was sort of based on. And it all of these key takeaways, all these key themes kind of come back to this importance of social science work in the sustainable ag field. So how do you use social science to get greater engagement with conservation practices? So that's where I'll kind of end. So going over the themes, the first one was conservation motivations. Why were the farmers we were talking to engaging with conservation practices? And almost all of the women, pretty much all of the women were saying environmental stewardship was kind of what guided them to adopt these conservation practices. So we had this one woman from Washtenaw County say the reason that they were adopting was to be conscious of the environment. We want to make sure that we are able to keep farming. In order to do that, we need to take care of the land. We have to be conscious of the fact that every action has a reaction, and we want to be able to have positive reactions. And this really fits well with previous research that has found support for women farmers being more environmentally oriented. So this really fits into a larger narrative outside of Michigan as well. For young farmers, they were very, very focused on financial concerns. So this young farmer in Lenawee County was saying that they used no-till to help reduce trips across the field to save time and fuel rather than being really focused on maybe soil health or a little bit soil health. They wanted to keep their soil in place, but it wasn't this same environmental stewardship model that they were focused on. They were thinking about their time and their finances. So there was a larger theme as well for time. So what the young farmer was saying in terms of saving time really fit with this other theme that time was a major constraint. And essentially they were trying to decide, they were going back and forth about what can I actually take on, what can I put on my plate in addition, can I try new techniques when I have such limited time? And what we saw specifically was this theme of part-time farming. So this woman farmer from Washtenaw County mentioned that nowadays farmers, farming is not always their only source of income. So you have that timing restraint. Can I handle another thing put on my plate? This young farmer from Monroe mentioned that his whole family, they only farm part-time, they only farm on the side. And he particularly had full-time employment off the farm. So sometimes it's finding the time during the day that works to interact with offices while they're open. So he's talking about this limitation of being able to even go in and learn about conservation practices from, for example, conservation districts. And again, this really aligned with previous research where we're seeing that farmers are part-time nowadays. And specifically for women and young farmers, they're not going to traditional outreach events. So if they have a career outside of the farm, it's hard to go to things like field days when they align with the workday. In terms of where they were kind of building their network and getting information, Farm Bureau was the key kind of source for both groups. For young farmers in particular, they were participating in these young farmer groups that Farm Bureau puts on. This young farmer in Lenawee County said that Farm Bureau was really the only main group that I'm part of that discusses topics like conservation and financials on the farm. And for women farmers, we didn't see the like organized farm group, like these young farmer groups, but they were overarchingly getting much of their information about farming issues and about new farm techniques from the Farm Bureau. And this conversation about peer networks and information sources also fit into a larger theme that we were seeing within the research, where young farmers and women farmers were struggling with kind of finding their community, finding the respect within the farming community, to have their ideas heard and their suggestions kind of accepted. So this woman farmer from Washtenaw County mentioned, my favorite line is, "Where's your dad?" or "Where's your husband?" And she would respond with, "Well, if you want to speak to someone, you can talk to me, but there's nobody else here, so it's me or nothing." So kind of not being taken seriously. And then this young farmer from Lenawee County talked about how trust in the young people is kind of another challenge. Sometimes I find that, or I get the picture that the older guys don't listen to me because I haven't been around long enough to know what's going on or how things go. And it feels sometimes like I have good ideas, but they get shut down because that's not the way they've been done before. And again, this is a topic, both finding the trust and respect, but also having a community where you can throw around ideas and really get the information you need, is something that we've seen quite a bit in the research. So this focus on peer networks. And this is one of my favorite quotes from a project by Asbruth et al. In 2023, talking about practical farmers of Iowa, where the farmer describes being able to talk to other farmers who are interested in the same kinds of practices without feeling like you're an alien or having to defend your choices. So we're seeing this importance of building a network around you to be able to adopt these practices. So if we looked at MEEP specifically, we did see generally positive responses from interview participant farmers, though when we asked them how other farmers that they talked to engaged with MEEP or what they thought of MEEP, the response tended to be more neutral. So other farmers, the question of time kind of came back here. So this woman farmer from Washtenaw County described it as, it just seems like a mountain of something to get done when you're already trying to push through a big enough hill as it is. And older farmers, and specifically, were also kind of describing it as something too time consuming to engage in for just the last 2 years of their career. And then kind of going back to this peer network idea, only half of our farmers and CCA interview participants were actively talking to other farmers about the program. So you're not even getting necessarily that communication about the program from people who are viewing it more positively. You're not getting that engagement with other farmers who might be more on the fence. Also, MEEP is a voluntary program, so it's not really surprising, but we did see much more self-selection from more environmentally minded farmers. Though we did see two sub-themes within this, where direct consumer farmers were more engaged with MEEP. So this woman farmer from Lenawee County, who her farm markets their freezer beef directly to local customers, she described it as being able to say that you're MEEP verified just gives them a little additional assurance. It just gives some added reassurance to customers that we're being good stewards. And then you also got the urban proximity piece. So this other woman, farmer from Washtenaw County, is close to Ann Arbor, and we call them tree huggers. You've got people that are constantly wanting to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So anything that you can do to show that you're trying to do a good job, I think it educates people and makes them realize that, okay, they're not out there doing it to do it, they're doing it in the right manner. And this finding, particularly about the self-selection, like I said, it's not necessarily surprising, but kind of the interesting piece about it is that we weren't really seeing any shift from earlier research. So Stewart et al. Did a project in 2014 with interviews with 28 meat program farmers. Again, saw positive attitudes for the participant farmers. So ours was a little different in that we weren't necessarily engaging farmers who, we weren't targeting farmers who were already involved in meat. Many of them were, but that wasn't the target audience necessarily. But we did see that same self-selection for environmentally minded farmers. And one thing we also saw was this, the focus was on avoiding law enforcement or regulations on farming. So we see that a little bit with the direct to consumer and urban proximity piece, where they want to kind of show that they're doing it right to an external source. But this woman farmer that I'm quoting here also mentioned that they verified specifically for insurance incentives or protections down the line. So this kind of brings me to the last piece of kind of what I want to talk about, where if programs like MEEP are thinking of, okay, how do we get past self-selection without just straight up mandating the process, you have to kind of think about the audience that you're aiming for. And key pieces that came out of our research that is also supported by the larger social science research is that there's no right way to market, meaning different approaches are going to work for different audiences. You have to meet your audience where they are. So think about the messaging itself more than how you're marketing it, like the physical or conversational piece of it, and then focus on the messenger. So from our research, I think one of my favorite findings was when we asked CCAs kind of recommendations for how to better market MEEP, we got the full spectrum. Literally nobody had the same answer. And it really went from the CCA on the left here saying, I think that one-on-one conversation is better. And then the other CCA saying, I think little postcard publication is what you need. So you really got the full range of options. And so it's not about putting like all of your eggs in one basket, essentially. Like we want to be trying different approaches with your audience. And specifically, you want to be focusing on recognizing where individual farmers fall on the adoption scale. So this brings us back to the motivations piece at the beginning, whether farmers are motivated by environmental stewardship or if they're motivated by financial concerns. You want to make sure that your message is aligning with those concerns that they have. One thing that we haven't talked about here in this presentation yet is risk, but that's very key to farmers. They obviously take on a lot of risk in their daily operations, and you want to make sure that you're finding ways to decrease their risk. But then how do you want to be framing conservation practices in a way that helps them see how it can help manage risk or decrease risk. And then finally, the goals and barriers, which is kind of a combination of the other two, where again, you have to look at what is their goal, like what are they actually aiming for? So the CCA mentioned a farmer who's only interested in raising bushels. So MEEP might not come up naturally in conversation, but how can you identify conservation practices that may help with yield, for example? And then finally, focusing on the messenger. So we saw this for Farm Bureau. So for young farmers and women farmers in Michigan, Farm Bureau, or at least in Southeast Michigan, Farm Bureau might be a really great place to start. But we also saw that conservation districts were viewed very positively by those farmers who were engaged in MEEP. They saw them as a good opportunity because they would actually come out and give you recommendations based on your operation. So that's maybe an opportunity for conservation districts to really do the legwork of going out to farmers directly that they aren't seeing coming into the office. And then CCAs, we did see quite a few of them talking about being farmers first. And for this farmer, to me, you have to learn by doing. And kind of he was testing things out on his own farm and then bringing that to his clients, his customers. So again, that builds respect and trust and kind of like seeing somebody else be able to do it. well. And so CCAs, this is another opportunity maybe for CCAs kind of to step in related to conservation practices, which was another key finding that we had in our own research, and is kind of recommended in broader research where there's a shift towards private sector advisors. All right, that's my part. I can hand it off to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Marie Carmen, for the presentation. It was really it's great work, and it's really good insights. And I'm going to kind of build off of that, or some of those similar themes, in my presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about some ongoing work that I've been involved with, that's funded by the Herb Family Foundation, which I know funds a lot of work. And I want to acknowledge off the bat that that I'm presenting work that I've done in close collaboration with Dr. Julie Dahl from Michigan Ag Advancement. We've been partnering for a long time, in these sort of listening sessions, and what we think of as kind of stakeholder engagement. And really it's learning from producers and advisors about the realities of implementing conservation in Michigan. So Julie and I have been working for years on this. I will say that this presentation is mine, so any mistakes or formatting errors are mine alone, and not Julie's. So this project that we've been working on over the last few years is specifically kind of focused on the concept of soil health, and thinking about what it might take to expand and improve soil health across the state of Michigan. So we really have kind of taken this as sort of a systems level framing of conservation agriculture. So thinking beyond just individual practices, and more how those practices interact together to achieve soil health outcomes that we believe, and there's good evidence that they have both significant benefits for natural resource quality, but also for farms themselves that are able to implement those kinds of approaches. So there's certainly been growing interest in the soil health concept and approach to conservation, not just in Michigan, but over the last decade, there's been a variety of expansion of state level policies and civic programs focused on improving soil health. And so this project is really looking to identify opportunities within Michigan to support soil health adoption through policy and new programs. This builds off of some previous work that Julia and I have done to really, again, learn from actual producers about some of the challenges and opportunities around conservation in Michigan. So this is just aside from some previous work where we kind of identified 4 broad themes of barriers or challenges that producers face. So thinking about the way that conservation programs are structured and some of the limitations of those programs, where they're typically kind of in short term, they're designed to really incentivize or provide some cost share and technical assistance to help farmers get going in practice adoption, but that doesn't necessarily capture the entire process of implementing practices or certainly like a soil health system. And that's a theme that I'm going to return to here in a few minutes. Limited market opportunities, again, another theme we're going to hit on soon. Lack of human capital, right? So challenges with farm labor, with transitioning sort of like learning systems, and how production is done in what we might think of as conventional agricultural systems versus more, soil health or agroecologically based systems, and inadequate social networks, right? Both among farmers and then among others that are providing guidance and technical assistance and ongoing support. So in this phase of the project, what we're really looking to do is build off of the work to identify barriers and really be looking at opportunities, and where, what kinds of programs or policies might we be able to create that would be most supportive for Michigan's farmers and landowners. so through this process of what I'm going to call focus groups or listening sessions, again, really just conversations with producers. We were really looking to kind of co-create innovative solutions. So rather than having folks who aren't actually on the ground managing farms come up with policies that we think are going to have positive impacts to help kind of crowdsource those ideas among producers. So through this process, Julie and I pulled together a number of conversations or listening sessions in several parts of the state. So again, I want to acknowledge first that this Michigan's an incredibly diverse state in terms of landscape and agricultural systems. So we held 4 of these conversations, and this certainly is only scratching the surface of the diversity of agriculture and realities throughout Michigan. So kind of take that as a caveat. We've held 2 of these listening sessions in Southwest Michigan, mostly with corn, soy, row crop producers, some livestock producers, and some vegetable producers as well. We held one in the Traverse Bay area, which is an incredibly diverse and kind of unique area of agriculture in the state. So talking with vegetable producers, with some folks who produce pasture cattle, some orchard producers, grapes and apples and things like that. And then grain producers in the Saginaw Bay area, as well as advisors in that particular listening session. So, I mean, just to give you a sense of what these are like, so Julie and I will pull together a group of producers somewhere between 8 to 12, 8 to 15 producers. Sometimes we'll have some advisors in the room, meaning some private sector, whether it's crop advisors or retailers, or conservation professionals, like from conservation districts, as part of those conversations. But we really wanted to gather perspectives of producers who've been kind of heavily engaged in implementing soil health systems. So I just want to also acknowledge that these weren't designed to be broadly representative of all producers in Michigan. This was really trying to identify what the opportunities are from producers who've been successful at implementing these kinds of conservation systems, despite some of those barriers that I referenced a few minutes ago. I'm really thinking with them about what kinds of policies might be helpful to help pull other producers into that kind of production system. These conversations are usually somewhere between an hour and a half or 2 hours. Sometimes they'll go a little bit longer. And they're very kind of loosely structured. So I'll come back to that, some of that in a few minutes in terms of like what we learned through going through this process. But I want to share sort of 4 broad insights of what we learned through these conversations. So, and you're going to see some mirroring here in terms of the barriers that we talked about and sort of how we kind of themed these solutions. So one was the idea of building local capacity, right? So thinking about investing in local conservation agencies or organizations, investing in the personnel at those, the technical expertise to help support producers in implementing new systems or innovating on farms. The need for diversified markets and supply chains, really building up the capacity of diversified markets for products, both new agricultural products or commodities, as well as for commodities produced in different ways or using soil health based approaches. We talked about this idea of kind of conservation ladders, or building a more comprehensive kind of public programming that helps to support producers through more of that process of building soil health over time. And then the idea of peer learning, right? So promoting peer-to-peer conservation networks. So to go through each in a little more depth here. So one of the things that we wanted to do with these conversations was learn from these kinds of producers, what their experiences had been with conservation programs, what their thoughts were about conservation programs. So meaning both those kind of USDA, what we think of as Farm Bill programs, things like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Reserve Program, these largely cost share based programs that are supporting on-farm adoption of practices, as well as the MEEP program, which Marie Carmen had talked about. I'm sure most folks are familiar with. The interesting thing that we learned, I think, through this, or that I learned through these conversations, is that farmers are relatively agnostic about programs. They're really more interested in the people that they're working with at those local conservation agencies, whether it's the local conservation district or state staff or USDA folks through NRCS. Generally, the producers we talked with had very positive interactions with their local conservation agencies. That they they recognize that there are a lot of limitations in terms of lack of funding or capacity. I think some folks, spoke to the fact that they would see turnover in staffing at their conservation district, which is something they felt was a limitation. They recognize, as I spoke to a few minutes ago, in terms of the barriers, right? The limitations of having most of these programs be based on that short term, 1 to 3, 1 to 5 year time frame. And many of these producers really had spoken about conservation or soil health as more of a journey than a destination, right? And so this idea that conservation programs are really just trying to get the ball rolling so that producers can then learn by doing, like, there's value there, but it may be insufficient to really support producers in the long term. I have a few just example quotes here, right? So one producer is speaking about USDA programs, is that, again, they're really focused on what we think of as like the middle adopters rather than the early adopters, or producers who are experimenting or implementing soil health based approaches on their own without that funding, and then they may lose out. And this was a particular concern in some of the newer approaches, or some of the kind of climate smart commodity programs that have come online or had come online over the last few years that were really again aimed at those middle adopters. And there's certainly value there, but in some ways these producers felt like there was a lack of incentive for those early adopters as well, or lack of recognition for those early adopters. And then again, many people spoke to their own kind of personal experiences, or just hearing about long processing times for applications, lack of successful applications. And again, many of these producers were implementing soil health systems on their own outside of programs, mainly because they didn't feel that they could rely on those programs. But really coming back to it, the thing they really valued about these programs were more the relationships that they had at that local level and being able to work with conservation professionals. So more kind of agnostic about the programs themselves, but really valuing that local capacity. And they really talked highly about, or positively about, the need to build up that kind of local capacity to help work with farmers over the long haul. Likewise, when it comes to sort of this idea of the limitations or ways to build on conservation programs, we really talked a lot about the idea of conservation ladders, right? So the idea of building on existing programs, whether it's MEEP, which they talked about generally positively, it's a good baseline. It's a way to sort of have everybody meet sort of a basic standard, but then programs should be able to help farmers go further, right? And to acknowledge for when producers are implementing practices on their own outside of programs and valuing that. They really talked a lot, and this I think fits with their sort of general approach to making on-farm decisions, right? Is that many conservation programs are focused, again, on individual practices over short timelines. And that doesn't match with the reality of how they're managing their own farms, where they're really taking more of a systems approach, where soil health as an outcome is really a broad, holistic goal of theirs in terms of how they manage their farms and make decisions, and programs really don't reflect that, right? That they're not really taking the larger context into account. Now, I think through these conversations, again, producers are really more focused on their own farms and making their own farms work, as the quote says here, right? That you have to make conservation work in your, at the farm scale, at the field scale. It has to work within your own farm budget. And they're really thinking, again, holistically about these systems. And programs can be helpful, but but I would say generally through these conversations, we weren't able to generate very specific ideas about what those programs might look like. So that's maybe an area of ongoing work. And I would say that's an area where producers can help drive sort of the directions and goals or desired outcomes of those programs. But I think there's a need for, policy expertise in terms of how to actually design programs and in that more holistic systems-based way. Okay, so moving on to the idea of markets, right? And so again, markets reflect the reality of the industry that producers are operating in, right? And so thinking again broadly about soil health systems, require diversity as the example quote here talks. A lot of these producers talked a lot about the need to move beyond just corn soy systems to really build diversity by incorporating small grains, cover crops, integrating livestock back into row crop systems. In Traverse City, there was a lot of discussion about the need, where they're operating more in specialty markets that have been really whipsawed the last, over the last decade or so. And so the need to build more diversity on farm and then the required market infrastructure to go along with that, right? So thinking about everything from on-farm storage to, and on-farm cleaning to, processing, transportation. There's a need for advisors as well, right? In these diversified markets and having advisors who can help connect producers to actual market outlets, right? So sort of the idea of market connectors being really important. One of the themes that came up quite a bit, particularly in the Southwest and in the Saginaw Bay area, is opportunities around food grade grains, but that there are a lot of needs there to build up a diversified supply chain there, right? Everything from specialized breeding programs to kind of updated safety regulations, helping producers understand those regulations, being able to implement, appropriate cleaning and handling protocols on farm. There were a lot of gaps there and a lot of needs that need to be built up. And then the fourth theme that we touched on, or that was brought up quite a bit, right, was this idea of peer-to-peer learning, right? Producers want to learn from other producers, both about how they're managing on-farm practices, how they're connecting with those markets, what kinds of market opportunities do they see. There's, I think, some market power in producers being able to group together and create some supply that can help kind of incentivize those investments in diversified markets. There's a need for more kind of farmer advocates and leaders as well, right? So producers want to connect with other producers, but often they want others in the room and in those conversations as well, right? Again, those private sector advisors, the ag retailers, the CCAs who are supporting on-farm decision making, as well as again, going back to those conservation professionals at the local level, the people that they have those relationships and connections with are really important, and being part of that. Part of those conversations is really important. So this was a topic that came up, like I said, quite a bit. And I think going back to kind of the design of these, right? At the beginning, I referenced these as focus groups, and that in some ways just reflects my sort of academic research background and thinking of these as an opportunity to ask producers questions. But the reality of it is that, Julie and I will prepare for these and we'll have a few guiding questions. But really it's we get the ball rolling and we have a few things just to get the conversation started. And then we can kind of sit back and shut up and listen to farmers. And they're not just talking to us, they're talking with each other and they're learning from each other and bouncing ideas off of each other when it comes to not only the topics we've talked about and thinking about off-farm markets and policies, but again, getting into the weeds, if you will, of what it takes to implement and be successful with these conservation or soil health-based systems on their farms. And it's been an incredible learning process for me to be able to just be part of those conversations. It's something I value incredibly. And I think just reflects, again, the real desire for farmers to connect around these kinds of issues and help support each other. So I think that's an area of significant opportunity. So just quickly, kind of the next steps of where we're going with this. again, trying to kind of dig into some of these themes and be thinking about kind of specific policies or programs, whether it's, expanding on existing programs like MEEP, or thinking about new policies or programs that can really, again, be focused on those outcome-based goals that producers have around building both diversified and soil health oriented production systems. I think, again, reflecting the fact that these weren't necessarily trying to be broadly representative, I think there's a need to continue these kinds of conversations with a broader set of stakeholders to facilitate those broader peer-to-peer exchanges and conversations to kind of keep these discussions going. And then again, lastly, kind of connecting producers with decision makers, because I think a lot of people who are making policy, whether it's in Lansing or in Washington, aren't necessarily tuned into some of these conversations. And so I think there's an opportunity to help support farmers, landowners, and advisors playing a stronger role in how policy is made and what policy looks like. So that's kind of where we're going with things. We will be looking to kind of write up some of these results in a report that we'll be hoping to release later this year.